can you see that the belief from childhood is having right now still a very large impact on your life? Can you see that? In terms of what you believe and what you do in your day-to-day life. Yeah? Okay. Okay, well, I'm just going to swap this around. Hopefully that might improve my transmission issues. Okay, so then comes question number 2. What do I do to avoid feeling these things? All right. So remember we said a couple of days ago now that the way to progress, and in fact I'm saying to you basically that the only way to truly progress is to feel everything that you believed when you were a child. Actually feel it. When you feel it fully, you can release it. And when you release it, you're then open to a new belief entering you. And the reason why many of you are struggling with divine truth is because you hear it and you go, wow, that's so true here. And here's going, that's not true at the same time. So your heart is going, that's not true, and your head's going, yes, that's true. Heart's going, no, it's not. Head's going, yes, it is. And if you're mind dominant, you say, shut up, heart. Yes, it is. Right? And if you're heart dominant, you say, shut up, mind. No, it isn't. Right? So it just depends on, and most of us are head dominant, so we say, shut up, heart. No, what I believe is true is now true. But from a what we call subconscious perspective, and I believe there is no such thing, but most people would suggest there is, they go, I keep on doing what I know I shouldn't do. And why do we do that? Because these childhood beliefs drive what we do, whether we think differently or not. Now, the only way for these childhood beliefs to leave us is for us to feel about them. We're going to have to feel about them at some point. Now, do you know how we know that most of us aren't feeling about them? Because the reality is that none of you have yet cried about any of these things we've listed while we're talking about them. If you were feeling about them, you'd be going, and you'd start having these feelings inside of you of, wow, like no wonder I'm struggling with my addictions. Like I'm just not wanting to feel all of this stuff. Just all this childhood beliefs that I don't want to feel. And what I notice here is it's so interesting. We can have a really in-depth conversation together, and the majority of you walk out the door and you're not upset at all. And I'm going, if I had just learnt that, I'd be pretty upset. You know? I'd be pretty upset about some things. Now, have you noticed how that makes you detune to movies and detune to songs and detune? Like you play a movie, for example, where someone gets stoned to death, like the other night, the stoning Soraya M movie. How many of you felt so overwhelmed with grief that you just cried for hours? Yeah, a few of you. How many of you watched it? So 3 times that amount. So that tells us we're already quite detuned to even connecting with how bad it is. When something's that bad, someone getting stoned to death for something they never did, doesn't affect us emotionally, then it tells us we're very detuned emotionally from our childhood beliefs. And this is why we struggle. We struggle because we're so detuned from childhood belief systems that we need to feel. If the average one of us felt how much lack there was in our life right now, and then connected to that, to the fact that when I was a child, I was taught there was lack here, there was lack there, I couldn't get enough food, I couldn't get enough clothes, I couldn't have the right shoes, I got hand-me-downs from everybody, and all of those kind of things, and we started to feel about that, the average person would cry a lot about that, actually. Right? Once they truly felt about that. And then as they cry about that, the feeling of lack leaves them. Now God's truth, which is there is abundance in the universe, can enter them. Does that make sense? But it can only enter them after that feeling of lack leaves them. And what I would like to firstly suggest to you is that choosing to not feel these emotions, in doing so, you are causing yourself a disservice. It's not serving you anymore to not feel these emotions. Because every one of these emotions you hold on to, it affects how you live every single day of your life. You make choices and decisions every single moment that are based upon these belief systems. And while they remain in you, you're automatically making the choices. A lot of these choices without even thinking, without even pondering about them, because it's automatic, because they're all emotions from your childhood that you are not willing to feel. Does that make sense? So you're making all these choices. Now, you imagine if all of these things were all flawed in some way, and for most of us, they all are. They're all flawed in some way. Can you imagine the effect that's going to have on every action I take? So put me in a situation where somebody treats me badly. What's going to be my choice? If I believe that strength is maintaining a good facade and not crying, what am I going to do? Not cry. Right? If I believe that perfection is putting an outward facade so that other people can think I've still got things together, what am I going to do? Put the facade on, make out I've still got everything together, when inside I'm either angry or sad. And then we wonder why so many people suicide, because they just can't put the facade on anymore a lot of times. Right? If I have the viewpoint that it's the society viewpoint, that if I feel my feeling in front of somebody else, that's going to mean that they'll probably get really upset and eventually want to commit me into a psychiatric institution, then it's highly unlikely that I'm going to actually feel. And the parents might have taught us that by saying, every time you cry, I'm going to belt you. Or they say it another way. If you keep crying, I'm going to give you something to cry about. There's a lot of threat in that, right? And so when we grow up, we believe if we keep crying, the world's going to give us something to cry about. So, of course, we turn off all of our crying as a result of that. Can you see just those three things have a huge impact on our decision to cry in public? And to grieve, we need to cry. I often say to Mary, babe, God made tear ducts. That means he meant you to use them. Right? So, but this is not how we've grown up to believe. Right? Okay.
Listening to everyone speak about this, and for me, it's raw. Like, it's really raw. These childhood beliefs. When I feel about addiction, I used to talk about addictions in that sort of, I do that because I'm avoiding that. I do that because I'm avoiding that.
Almost like you did yesterday, like almost making fun type of them and things like that.
Yeah.
Which I talked to Mary about last night.
Yeah, like yesterday in my talk, I had a lot of facade about things that were deeply personal to me because
deeply hurtful.
Deeply hurtful because I didn't want to put that on show in front of others, which is an addiction of mine.
Yes.
But I don't know, I'm too emotional to talk about it, but there's something...
Yes, when you truly connect with these feelings, you become so emotional about them that you can no longer talk about them. That's an indication you're actually starting to feel them, actually. When you really struggle to start talking about some of them, that's a good indication that you're now starting to feel them. Right? For the majority of people, they haven't even got that place yet. Right? If we're not struggling to talk about some of these childhood beliefs that feel really, really bad, then that's an indication that we're not sensitive to feeling them.
Yeah, and I suppose that's what I wanted to try and say to the group, is that when you get close to these beliefs, they're not just something you took on.
There's a deep hurt.
Investment and feeling around them.
Yes.
And that's the place you're going to hit when you give up an addiction.
And actually start feeling that belief. Yeah. And this is why it's so important to start looking at our addictions relating to these beliefs, because the reason why you are not sensitive to these beliefs right now, the reason why you can list them without crying, is because you have addictions that help you overcome them. Does everyone get that? It's the addictions that cause the desensitization to the belief that's harmful. So it's the addiction that even prevents you from feeling what you would normally feel if you were the child in that situation. So, for example, if we think about it just for a second, let's say as a child you went up and you were hungry, so you went in the fridge and you got out, a meal, not knowing that it was Daddy's favourite meal, and you started eating it. Let's say that's what happened as a child, and you were 6 or 7 years old and you went there and you were just innocently trying to feed yourself. Actually, it's probably a good thing, right? You weren't asking Mummy or Daddy to do it all for you, and you had a bit of self-responsibility. That's also a good thing. And you go and you get the meal and you start eating it, and then Dad comes in and it's his meal you're eating. So what does he do? He goes off at you. All right? Now, in that moment, you learned that you shouldn't take self-responsibility, that you have to now ask before you do anything. You have to ask somebody in a position of responsibility or power before you do anything. You can't take care of yourself unless you know for certain that nobody else is going to be bothered by it. And you learn quite a number of things, right? Now, if you go back to that event and feel about it, can you see that you'd probably have a good cry about what happened to you? Particularly if you got belted or punished for taking that meal. Does that make sense? You'd go back and you'd just feel the tears about that, wouldn't you? If you were truly connected with it emotionally. For the majority of us, we can even talk about the event and laugh about it while we're talking about it. That's how desensitized we have become to the child emotion associated with the event. Does that make sense? We've become so desensitized that we laugh about things that were actually deeply hurtful to us, and we still feel deep hurt about. There's an indication that we feel deep hurt about it because we're so frightened now in our day-to-day life to actually go and do anything on our own back just in case we make a mistake and somebody's going to punish us. That's the indication that we're still terrified, right? And yet when we talk about the event that caused that, we laugh. That's how much desensitization there is. So you can see that the addictions have to somehow desensitize and you spell that with an S, don't you? That's why I did a V. Work that out. I was trying to do a Z, actually. All right, so we desensitize ourselves from the actual feeling of what happened in our childhood to create that belief. That's what we do. The addictions are all about that, creating desensitization inside of our soul to the actual hurt. Does that make sense to everyone? That's why we choose addictions. We choose addictions because it helps us detune from the pain. This is why they become so strong, because we want to avoid pain all the time or be numb. Remember, Mary, in our discussion 2 days ago, Mary mentioned the 3 options. There was feel the pain, right? Feel pleasure only, feel pain, feel pleasure, or be numb. Most of us, feel pain is not an option. All right? So now there's just feel pleasure or numb. So our addictions help us desensitize so that we only feel pleasure or we feel numb. We're desensitized completely to the pain. It's a way of management of pain. Does that make sense to everyone? We're really just managing the pain. We spend most of our lives, in fact, managing pain.